Morning, juniors. Today I'm going to talk to you about The Lowest Animal by Mark Twain, an essay. On Classroom, I'm going to post also a video about Mark Twain so you can kind of get a better idea behind who he is or who he was. But the objective for today, tomorrow, Friday, is close read Mark Twain's essay, The Lowest Animal. Analyze the use of satire and irony as a part of the rhetorical appeals, ethos, pathos, logos, to support his philosophical beliefs. I'm going to have you look at some evidence. The evidence that I want you to provide to me is going to be participation. Tomorrow on a question on Classroom, and then also on Friday a quiz to better understand American satire. American satire is something we use quite often, actually. It's an artistic form in which individual or human misconduct, abuses, or shortcomings are criticized using certain characteristics or methods. Basically, it's the use of sarcasm, irony, exaggeration in order to ridicule human foolishness. Um, Usually, it's done with the purpose to encourage the public to view human faults as humorous and ridiculous. More importantly, it's to encourage changes in current issues or discourse public behaviors, like this clip, if it'll play. No, it won't play right now. That's okay. For instance, so when Mark Twain was a popular writer at the time, during the Civil War and after the Civil War, he was our first American humorist. He wrote one of the most important books, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn and The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. At the time, Darwin had this belief in the theory of evolution that he had printed and published. And again, it was the idea that we have descended from lower products, lower species, and an idea that Mark Twain is going to kind of satirize is this idea of. So, for instance, take a look at this image and how different it is than the one previous. And the idea is that satire and irony on this take a look at the image. What's being satirized here? Well, the idea that we have tools, we've created tools, right? Somewhere here in the middle. But then what did those tools do to us? Which answers the second question. It ironically has made us back into little hunched animals like earlier, which is obviously a discrepancy. So as you read again, what I want you to do is be aware of the satire that Mark Twain produces and the irony that he produces in this essay of his, this famous essay of his, which actually is it's a really, not necessarily, it's difficult, but simple at the same time. So I want you to pay attention to it, and I want you to think of some of the lines that you might pull out later. Okay? This was to have been prefaced by newspaper clippings, which apparently dealt with religious persecutions in Crete. The clippings have been lost. They probably referred to the Cretan Revolt of 1897. In August 1572, similar things were occurring in Paris and elsewhere in France. In this case, it was Christian against Christian. The Roman Catholics, by previous concert, sprang a surprise upon the unprepared and unsuspecting Protestants, and butchered them by thousands. Both sexes and all ages. This was the memorable St. Bartholomew's Day. At Rome, the Pope and the Church gave public thanks to God when the happy news came. This is obviously ironic, because why would the Church be happy about Christians fighting Christians and killing each other? So satirical right there, making fun of how Christian people should be peaceful, but they're not. During several centuries, hundreds of heretics were burned at the stake every year because their religious opinions were not satisfactory to the Roman Church. In all ages, the savages of all lands have made the slaughtering of their neighboring brothers and the enslaving of their women and children the common business of their lives. Hypocrisy, envy, malice, cruelty, vengefulness, seduction, rape, robbery, swindling, arson, bigamy, adultery, and the oppression and humiliation of the poor and the helpless in all ways have been and still are more or less common among both the civilized and uncivilized people of the earth. For many centuries, the common brotherhood of man has been urged on Sundays, and patriotism on Sundays and weekdays both. Yet patriotism contemplates the opposite of a common brotherhood. Women's equality with man has never been conceded by any people, ancient or modern, civilized or savage. So, up until now, he's just been commenting about the irony of how Christians think that they're being good and patriotic, when in fact, you know, they might be super smiley and happy one Sunday, and then on Monday, they're back to their old deceitful ways, which is obviously not showing equality with women would be one deceitful way. I have been studying the traits and dispositions of the lower animals, so called, and contrasting them with the traits and dispositions of man. I find the results humiliating for me, for it obliges me to renounce my allegiance to the Darwinian theory of the ascent of man from the lower animals, since it now seems plain to me that the theory ought to be vacated in favor of a new and truer one, this new and truer one to be named the descent of man from the higher animals. This is kind of his main idea right here. In proceeding toward this unpleasant conclusion, I have not guessed or speculated or conjectured, but have used what is commonly called the scientific method. That is to say, I have subjected every postulate that presented itself to the crucial test of actual experiment, and have in its turn before advancing to the next. These experiments were made in the London Zoological Gardens and covered many months of painstaking and fatiguing work. Before particularizing any of the experiments, I wish to state one or two things which seem to more properly belong in this place than further along. This is the interest of clearness. The massed experiments established to my satisfaction certain generalizations, to wit: 1. That the human race is of one distinct species. It exhibits slight variations in color, stature, mental caliber, and so on, due to climate, environment, and so on. But it is a species by itself and not to be confounded with any other. 2. That the quadrupeds are a distinct family also. This family exhibits variations in color, size, food preferences, and so on, but it is of a family by itself. 3. That the other families, the birds, the fishes, the insects, the reptiles, are more or less distinct also. They are in the procession. They are links to the chain which stretches down from the higher animals to man at the bottom. So these three things are kind of one of his three, not main ideas, but subtopics, subplots, subpoints that he's trying to improve. Some of my experiments were quite curious. In the course of my reading, I had come across a case where many years ago some hunters on our Great Plains organized a buffalo hunt for the entertainment of an English earl, and to provide some fresh meat for his larder. They had charming sport. They killed 72 of these great animals and ate part of them and left the 71 to rot. In order to determine the difference between an anaconda and an earl, if any, I caused 7 young calves to be turned into the anaconda's cage. The grateful reptile immediately crushed one of them and swallowed it, then lay back satisfied. It showed no further interest in the calves and no disposition to harm them. I tried this experiment with other anacondas, always with the same results. The fact stood proven that the difference between an earl and an anaconda is that the earl is cruel and the anaconda isn't, and that the earl wantonly destroys what he has no use for, but the anaconda doesn't. This seemed to suggest that the anaconda was not descended from the earl. It also seemed to suggest that the earl was descended from the anaconda and had lost a good deal in the transition. All right, so this is obviously poking fun at the idea of social order or hierarchy of animals, and thus saying that human beings are acting basely compared to animals. I was aware that many men who have accumulated more millions of money than they can ever use have shown a rabid hunger for more and have not scrupled to cheat the ignorant and the helpless out of their poor servings in order to partially appease that appetite. I furnished 100 different kinds of wild and tame animals the opportunity to accumulate vast stores of food, but none of them would do it. The squirrels and bees and certain birds made accumulations, but stopped when they had gathered a winter supply and could not be persuaded to add to it either honestly or by chicane. In order to bolster up a tottering reputation, the ant pretended to store up supplies, but I was not deceived. I know the ant. These experiments convinced me that there is this difference between man and the higher animals. He is avaricious and miserly. They are not. In the course of my experience, I convinced myself that among the animal, man is the only one that harbors insults and injuries, broods over them, waits till a chance offers, then takes revenge. The passion of revenge is unknown to the higher animals. Roosters keep harems, but it is by the consent of their concubines. Therefore no wrong is done. Men keep harems, but it is by brute force, privileged by atrocious laws which the other sex were allowed no hand in making. In this matter, man occupies a far lower place than the rooster. Comparison here. Cats are loose in their morals, but not consciously so. Man, in his descent from the cat, has brought the cat's looseness with him, but has left the unconsciousness behind, the saving grace which excuses the cat. The cat is innocent, the man is not. Indecency, vulgarity, obscenity, these are strictly confined to man. He invented them. Among the higher animals there is no trace of them. They hide nothing, they are not ashamed. Man with his soiled mind covers himself. He will not even enter a drawing room with his breast and back naked. So alive are he and his mates to indecent suggestion. Man is the animal that laughs, but so does the monkey, as Mr. Darwin pointed out, and so does the Australian bird that is called the laughing jackass. No, man is the animal that blushes. He's the only one that does it, or has occasion to. At the head of this article, we see how 3 monks were burned to death a few days ago, and a prior put to death with atrocious cruelty. Do we inquire into the details? No, we should find out that Pryor was subjected to unprintable mutilations. Man, when he is a North American Indian, gouges out his prisoner's eyes. When he is King John, with a nephew to render trouble untroublesome, he uses a red-hot iron. When he is a religious zealot dealing with heretics in the Middle Ages, he skins his captives alive and scatters salt on his back. In the first Richard's time, he shuts up a multitude of Jews' families in a tower and sets fire to it. In Columbus's time, he captures a family of Spanish Jews, but that is not printable in our day in England. A man is fined 10 shillings for beating his mother nearly to death with a chair, and another man is fined 40 shillings for having 4 pheasant eggs in his possession without being able to satisfactorily explain how he got them. Of all the animals, man is the only one that is cruel. He's the only one that inflicts pain for the pleasure of doing it. It is a trait that is not known to the higher animals. The cat plays with the frightened mouse, but she has this excuse, that she does not know that the mouse is suffering. The cat is moderate, unhumanly moderate. She only scares the mouse. She does not hurt it. She doesn't fig out its eyes or tear off its skin or drive splinters under its nails, man fashion. When she is done playing with it, she makes a sudden meal of it and puts it out of its trouble. Man is the cruel animal. He alone is that distinction. The higher animals engage in individual fights, but never in organized masses. Man is the only animal that deals with the atrocity of atrocities, war. He's the only one that gathers his brethren about him and goes forth in cold blood and with calm pulse to exterminate his kind. He is the only animal that for sordid wages will march out, as the Hessians did in our revolution and as the boyish Prince Napoleon did in the Zulu War, and help to slaughter strangers of his own species who have done him no harm and to whom he has no quarrel. Man is the only animal that robs his helpless fellow of his country, takes possession of it, and drives him out of it, or destroys him. Man has done this in all the ages. There is not an acre of ground on the globe that is in possession of its rightful owner, that has not been taken away from its owner after owner, cycle after cycle, by force and bloodshed. Man is the only slave, and he's the only animal who enslaves. He has always been a slave in one form or another, and has always held other slaves in bondage under him in one way or another. In our day, he is always some man's slaves for wages, and does that man's work. And this slave has other slaves under him for minor wages, and they do his work. The higher animals are the only ones who exclusively do their own part to provide their own living. All right. Okay, so I'm stopping right here at page 3, the bottom of page 3. So you have 4, you have 5, you have 6. Okay, please finish reading it and stay tuned for a post tomorrow. That's all you have to do for today.